So I'm going to talk a little bit about jazz in my life. I didn't get really exposed to much jazz as a kid. My dad was mostly into classical music, and that's what got played around our house. Because both he and my mom were politically involved in the civil rights movement, I did hear a lot of folk and blues through their friends. And growing up in Berkeley and Oakland in the 60s, pretty much all the musical excitement in my life was about British rock, like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, or local bands like the Dead, Sly Stone, Jefferson Airplane, Big Brother and the Holding Company. But as I got into high school and started to hear more soul and R&B, I learned that many of the bands I thought were totally new and unique were actually influenced by earlier music, particularly the blues. And Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin led me into greater interest in the blues, and of course, at that age I wanted to learn how to play the guitar, as any young guy those days did. I remember trying to play Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good on my high school friend's Stratocaster, but I didn't get very far. In my early 20s, I decided to buy a guitar and take lessons. I became friends with a UC Berkeley student named John, who was a jazz guitarist, and asked him to teach me the blues. We had a couple lessons, and he taught me the pentatonic scale, basic chord changes. He invited me to listen to him play, and I got completely hooked. He tried to teach me some jazz scales, but he decided I need to hear more live jazz first. So we spent almost a year together going to shows once or twice a month. His favorite venue was a small San Francisco jazz club called the Keystone Corner. It was intimate and relatively cheap. He didn't have a car, and I did, so I drove and he bought the tickets. It was an incredibly formative musical experience. I got to hear older established horn players like Sonny Stitt and Dexter Gordon, bass player Charlie Hayden, and younger guitarists like Pat Metheny, among many others. The event that taught me how little I knew of this world I was stepping into was during a show by saxophone player Stan Getz. We got to North Beach early to find a parking place and walked over to the club to get in line. It was a packed show, and the line was out onto the street. We waited for almost an hour and talked about music. No smartphones then to doom scroll on. He was giving me a little background on Stan Getz when we noticed somebody further down the line yelling and arguing. The voice started getting closer, and I could see an older man on crutches, probably drunk, moving up the line towards us. Most of the people in line were trying to ignore him. So when he got to me, I did too. Both John and I were a lot younger than most of the people there, around 23 or 24. And so the drunk man seemed to focus on us. He grabbed my arm and said something like, "Stan Getz, he's nothing." Now, Lester Young was a real player. "You gonna tell me different, kid? You wanna fight about it?" I looked over at John and he was laughing. I had no idea who Lester Young was, but I certainly wasn't gonna fight to defend Stan Getz. I said something like, "No, sir, Lester Young was better, I'm sure." As the man moved on to try and generate more pushback further up the line, John said, "He's right, Lester Young was a better player." Stan Getz was amazing, and I'm sure I would have thought the same about Lester Young, though I would have had to hear him play live. I would have been around 2 since he died in '59. Our time going to the corner was a unique experience because they closed a year later due to financial problems. I never became the jazz guitarist I fantasized about. Life intervened and I didn't practice. I got together with my wife, Billy Sue. John graduated and we never saw each other again. I didn't become a jazz musician, but I became a jazz listener. When I need musical soothing or stimulation or to touch my creative soul, I turn to the deep waters of the jazz ocean.